All right, folks, thank you. We're going to listen to Jesse Irwin talk about student surveillance, how hackers can help protect student privacy. Jesse is a marketing communications professional working in security in San Francisco. She's an outspoken advocate for stronger privacy and security protections in education technology and spends as much time as possible teaching educators about online privacy and security. She regularly rants about student data privacy, security, and surveillance on Twitter, and her current passions include dinosaurs, big necklaces, tacos, and dropping the F-bomb during BSides presentations. On a more serious note, I've been asked to provide a trigger warning for any of you who might be a science fiction fan or a social justice warrior, because apparently there will be puppies. I do urge you to try and stick around anyway, because you wouldn't want to miss out. So let's all give it up for someone whose hand I once shook, my now very close personal acquaintance and fellow puppy aficionado, Jesse Irwin.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to warn you, I am nervous as fuck, and I don't know why, so apologies if I stumble all over myself. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about how hackers can help protect student privacy, one of my favorite topics in the world. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, but as we do at HackerCons, we usually have a Who Am I slide. I don't totally love these, but I feel like this is a thing I need to do so that I can get a little comfortable. So, who am I? I'm Jessie. I work in marketing and communications, and I specialize in privacy and security. It's my happy place. I have about 4 years experience in education technology, and I've been on both sides of the fence there. So I've been on the technologist side where we're building and developing all these tools for kids, and I've been the person in the classroom who's trying to get kids to actually use this shit and maybe do their homework. Not so easy. It would take me way too long to figure out how to explain how I found my way into security. But I think the love affair is 3 or 4 DEF CONs long now, kind of serious. And I do spend my off time working to raise security awareness. And I work with Melanie this year, who spoke before me, on organizing Roots Asylum at DEF CON for the kids so that we can teach them how to hack. So that being said, what is this talk about? Ultimately, this talk is going to be about security and the very large lack thereof that exists in education technology. I'm just going to give you a warning that this is not going to be a really technical talk. I like to make jokes about dropping O days. I don't have any to give you today. We're going to end up covering some of the kinds of technologies that are being used in the classroom. Some of them are kind of creepy and surveillance-y. We're also going to talk about some of the regular security vulnerabilities and things that are kind of asshole attacks that technologists are doing to kids in the classroom in their products. But yeah, fair warning, not going to be a massively technical talk. So to kick things off, I just want to give a really brief overview of the education technology industry. It's kind of boring, but it's a necessary setup. For the most part, a lot of the people who are building technology tools have this idea that technology is just going to be the absolute silver bullet that fixes all of the societal ills that we're trying to take care of with education. For the most part, though, as an industry, education technology tends to raise less money from investors for products than consumer technology. Even though they raise a little bit less, they still tend to have a lot of money flowing in. Every time I look at a number, the next year it's $2 to $3 billion higher. In the same way, though, that teaching doesn't necessarily attract the best and the brightest people, education technology doesn't tend to get the best and the brightest technologists because generally, like, somebody can pay them $250,000 a year to figure out how to go click a link or make a like button happen. That kind of sucks. I don't like that part. When you're launching a company, especially from the Silicon Valley, there's a lot of pressure to get out of the gates as quickly as possible with a new tool. There's this race to market. And one of the most frustrating experiences that I have had in my career is being inside of a company that's working really hard to just run for the market and say, okay, guys, where's the security? What are we doing for the privacy angle? Typically, though, the answer that I got is that security is a luxury. It doesn't matter that we have all of these open source software libraries out there and they're not really that hard to implement or maybe to audit to make sure that they fit within what your product should be doing. It's way too hard to do. Security is way too expensive because it takes too much time. It's obviously unnecessary. And one of my favorite excuses, which I think if you're sitting in this room, you understand, people will say, oh, but if we put too much security in, it's going to slow the site down. I mean, if it slows your site down, you're probably doing it wrong. But that being said, the thing that sucks is that this industry walks around with all of this money and says, whatever, who wants to hack kids' homework? That's not important. That's not going to happen. Another problem with the industry is that your end users and your purchasers aren't necessarily going to be technically literate. So on one side, when I'm working with a group of developers, they would say, well, we don't really get a demand to build in all of this security stuff into our app. Well, of fucking course you're not going to get a demand for security. You are selling to teachers. You are selling to educators. They're not security engineers. They're not going to ask you if you're accidentally using MDA5 as your password hash, which, by the way, is a no-no. I think we understand that. But it's really frustrating because on one side, you have all of these people with all of this money saying, yeah, let's go revolutionize some education stuff. And then they say, but we don't need to do the security piece. It's too expensive. It's too much. Another problem, schools typically don't have a lot of budget. They don't have the manpower. They don't have a single person on staff who is in a position where they take ownership of security. So you have an IT person who just makes sure that stuff runs. But there's no one who says, oh, well, what about network segmentation? What about all of this device management we might have to deal with BYOD? What do we do about that? That doesn't exist. What's really frustrating about that, too, is that education tends to be one of the most heavily data-mined industries there is out there, and you're having a lot of data collected on all sides. So you get data from the school side, you get data from the product side, you're getting data that's being sent back and forth from departments of education and governments. You have data that's really private and really sensitive flowing everywhere. And when you ask about security, there's just a whole bunch of, well, I mean, it's not my job. I don't want to do it. So that being said, when I talk about education tools and I talk about all of this data mining, what I'm really talking about, there are a lot of tools out there, and they do some creepy things. They tend to contain more sensitive information and more personal identifying stuff about kids than just a school assignment. So this attitude that no one's going to hack a kid's homework or no one's really interested in student data is kind of bullshit. Right now in the market, there are a lot of adaptive technologies, and what these adaptive technologies do is they basically monitor what kids are doing in the classroom for an assignment and collect as many data points as possible. And then they data mine and big data the hell out of those data points to try to draw insights and to try to draw conclusions. There are a lot of behavioral technologies, so teachers can walk around a room with a mobile device and say, well, this kid's behaving, this kid's not behaving. And that's a little creepy. But there are also tools that guidance counselors and special ed counselors will end up using with students, and they're maybe protected by HIPAA, but they're really not that secure either. In terms of what goes on in the classroom, there are a lot of content distribution channels for math lessons, science lessons, YouTube videos, you name it. But even though these may not have as much important personal identifying information, they do have grades, and grades are kind of a big deal in school. You still have learning management systems. There's all kinds of data storage and warehousing. I could name names, but we would be here at least until tomorrow, and that's probably not cool. I don't think anyone wants to miss the parties later. But that being said, for all of this information, in some cases these companies build profiles that are like 400, 500, 600 data points large. All of this information is just kind of swimming around, and if it gets out, especially in a data breach, and it's everything about a kid's life and a kid's family, that's a huge freaking catastrophe. In some cases, we're not even just talking about high school students or middle school students. We're talking about 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds with huger profiles on the internet than your Facebook profile. So that being said, I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that are out there that are creepy, one of the stories you tend to hear about education the most is the data mining. That tends to be one of the creepiest aspects, but it's not the absolute worst. This is the thing that gets the headlines. There are companies like In Bloom, and that's one of the ones that keeps all of the data about kids that end up getting shuttered because privacy advocates and parents just don't want something with that much information about their kids out there. And then you have places like the Gates Foundation or companies like Newton that really want to try to unlock the whole big data thing on kids. And they have really creepy programs. Like the Gates Foundation wanted to stick biometric bracelets on kids so that you could collect this information and figure out if they were paying attention during class. And if they weren't paying attention during class, then you could go get the data from, yes, pretty much. It's like, oh, this kid's not paying attention here because the data said so. How do we hack that so the kid keeps paying attention for as long as I want it to pay attention? That's a little creepy. Some of the other things that they've wanted to put in classrooms, surveillance cameras. Like, what do you...
Do you want the terrorists to win? Those are going to keep our kids safe.
Oh, that's what that's about? I'm sorry. Am I doing the psychologist? It really depends. So between K-12 and universities, it's a little different. Some colleges do have surveillance cameras, maybe not in a classroom. Sometimes in larger lecture halls. I know that about Virginia Tech. That's a long story. But there are kind of experiments going on where they're trying to figure out how to hack how much kids can learn so they can get more information in there. And I think that's fucking creepy, and I don't want to see it. There's some other weird things that go on with education technology tools too. In schools, IT departments tend to be more focused on monitoring and filtering and blocking web traffic so that kids can't go watch porn. They can't look at any graphic material. None of the good shit on the web that we actually get to enjoy can kids do, which is just fucking ridiculous. Because what ends up happening is all of these kids are in the classroom and their teacher says, hey, go make a YouTube video. Well, your web filtering tool says no YouTube, no Twitter, no Wikipedia. How are you supposed to get anything done in that environment? In the real world, if you go home and you do your homework and you have access to these things, you get a ton of stuff done. But what tends to happen in a lot of especially disadvantaged areas is that kids have their own devices in school that they bring home. And because so much of this web filtering keeps moving to the cloud and it actually ends up following them to their homes. So for the kids who have free internet access and can get on mom and dad's computer, they have one experience of the internet. For the kids who have to use a device that is school issued and has the cloud filtering that's just meant to watch what they're doing, they have a completely different internet experience. And that really impacts their digital literacy skills. That fucking sucks. I'll say that probably 800 more times, so just fair warning. The main reason for this is there's one piece of legislation called E-rate, and that's the rule that says kids can't watch porn in school or on their computer or whatever, which is just stupid, because it's a qualitative rule. It's a judgment value. It is a thing where someone says, kids can see this, but not this. I can't give you a fact or a math number or a reason why, but no. I am just saying no. More often than not, these filters are set up to actually catch certain web activities, and there will be a flag that goes up for an IT administrator, and suddenly the kid who went to that one site by accident because of a typo is in trouble because they accessed or tried to access something that they shouldn't have. In other situations, and this is one of the reasons I really love kids these days, kids have figured out how to circumvent this filtering. I don't know if you guys have heard of this thing called Tor. There's something with an onion involved. Kids fucking love that Tor thing. They know about it. They're like, oh, no, I can open this Tor thing and I can go do whatever I want on the internet and nobody else knows about it. So that is one of the only tools that kids have to actually get around this. On the other side, you have this creepy ass email filtering where schools get really pissed if they think that they are using Google Apps for EDU. And Google Apps is going to be scanning and taking away a little bit of data and trying to serve ads to the kids. Well, get mad at Google and then turn around and pay another company tens of thousands of dollars a year to scan for certain words to pop up in your email filters flag the word to administrator, and then go discipline a kid. I mean, we're supposed to be spending money on education technology to actually educate kids and give them learning experiences, and instead we're forking money over to web filters and email filters so they can go to the principal's office. Yeah.
What about email monitoring? Because I know my school uses Google to serve us email.
Well, so with Google, they actually have changed some of the way that they've structured apps for EDU. They don't like monitor or anything like that so that they can serve ads. They don't send out ads to kids, but there's this huge uproar where people will, the first example they will have is, we don't want Google in our school because of ads. It's like, well, that's fine. We're not giving the kids ads, but your administrators are doing the same damn behavior, and you're not drawing a line between what's okay and what's not okay. Okay, I lost my spot in my notes. Hold on. Oh, no, we're good. So that being said, there's a couple of other surveillance things that are really creepy. Some of these you might actually recognize as things that criminal groups on the internet do. Notice I didn't say hackers, because hackers don't do this on the internet. It's criminals. There's one case in Lower Merion, Pennsylvania, where a student was disciplined because an administrator actually accessed his laptop computer camera, turned it on, and saw what was on his desk, and thought that the kid had drugs on his desk at home, and the kid got in trouble. There was a huge court case, but why the hell do you need to have rat software in a kid's machine and turn it on when they're not in school to see what they're doing? There's some other cases where that software has been used by administrators to turn on a camera when girls are having a sleepover or changing clothes or something like that, which is even creepier. That's not a permission that school devices should have. That's not a thing they should be able to do.
1, 2, 3. That fucking sucks.
Yeah, basically.
Are these school-owned computers, or are they privately owned?
They're school-owned computers, and you can argue that if a student and a parent agree to an acceptable use policy, like, okay, fine, we wrote that in the rules for it, you agreed to it, we can do it, but it doesn't mean it's okay, especially if you're in a situation with a student where they don't have the means at home to access another machine. Like, their hands are completely tied. There are other situations where outside of school grounds, there are companies who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to actually do social media monitoring of students. So they will see what the teenagers are tweeting about. By the way, I don't know what this Fleek thing is, but I'm pretty sure somebody gets like $100,000 a year just to figure out what's on Fleek and what's not Fleek, or whatever these teenagers are doing right now.
Your lipstick is on Fleek.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Does that mean it's on, wait, does that mean it's on my teeth, or? Another creepy thing schools are starting to do as well is they're trying to actually stick RFID chips into student badges. So like, we use RFID chips to track cattle, but if you send your kid to school, we're also going to track it with the equivalent of a cattle tag. Yeah. Yeah. So ultimately, like, a lot of the things that I tend to see schools doing with technology, they're not about learning. They're about controlling behavior. They're about getting people in trouble. They're about discipline. And it's really creepy. On the other side, and moving to the next portion, we've had a brief overview of some of the things that suck in schools. We have all these tools that are building up and sucking up massive amounts of data. There's not really any consensus on security. There's not really any legislation that's helping us at least establish a baseline. So as a result, we get a lot of security holes. And we get security holes that they should be absolutely unimaginable. And they're not. So that being said, let's talk about some of the attacks and the vulnerabilities that are pretty common. I would name drop here. I would spend so much time listing the names of companies and putting logos up here. It's just unbelievable. So one of the things that tends to happen with education technology sites is, like I've said, they collect a ton of data, but when the data is in transit, and sometimes when it's in rest, it's not being protected properly. Education technologies hate talking about SSL, HTTPS, throw out whatever encryption word you want to use, the thing that puts the lock next to the HTTP with the S on it and the browser. They hate talking about it. They say it's a non-issue. Except that's the tool that we as security practitioners know provides privacy to our end user. Usually reasonable privacy, unless somebody in this room is really amazing at hacking around that, and we'll have that conversation later. But what ends up happening is these education technology companies say, nope, it's too much pressure to encrypt the whole site. It's too much crap to take the time and deal with session cookies and all of that. We're just going to encrypt the login page. That's it. Nobody's going to try to steal the kids' homework. Nobody would have any reason to try to log in and change grades or math assignments or anything. Never. Never, ever. So they just don't bother. There's one really good example of this. So there's a security researcher named Tony Porterfield. I'm so sad he couldn't be here today because he would be dropping O-Days with me. But he did some research a couple of years ago on a learning management system called Edmodo. And at the time, I think Edmodo had 30 million users. So it was pretty well established within K-12 schools. And I think they had raised about $60 million. And he realized that his kids use this tool all the time, but the login page was encrypted, nothing else. He realized he could literally fire sheep all of his kids with the browser plugin and see what they were doing with their homework, what they were doing when they were communicating with other people in their class and in their school. And he wasn't comfortable with that. So it might have ended up in the New York Times. I don't know exactly how that happened, but it might have been in the New York Times. Edmodo said, well, you know, we have this feature, but it's an opt-in. We're talking about kids, and we're talking about kids talking to kids and kids talking to teachers. That's not okay. That's not okay at all. It's been a couple of years since this happened, and it has been fixed. Instead of making their users opt in to the encryption, now it's default. But it should have been default all along. We're talking about extremely sensitive data here, and we're talking about kids. Kids, I mean, no freaking way. In another bit of research that Tony did, he found this list that's been running around the internet since October. There are a whole bunch of companies who have signed a student privacy pledge. So they signed the privacy pledge, and they all promise that they're not going to advertise and market to kids, and they take privacy really, really seriously. So if you go through the list and you go look at who has site-wide encryption and who doesn't, you'll figure out really quickly who cares about privacy and who doesn't. When he first started going through the list, he was up to 16 companies that didn't have any encryption anywhere at all. They were sending things in the clear. So tell me again how you're signing a student privacy pledge, but you're not actually building technologies that will take care of student privacy when you're shipping them out there and when the kids are using them. Well, the other thing is, Firesheep happened in 2011 to Facebook? It's 2015. It's been 4 fucking years. You can't figure out maybe how to make all of that lifting on the other side of how is this even possible? It just shouldn't be. Even if we get the education technologies to actually follow the best practices in encryption, we still have another problem. And that's the web filtering that I was talking to about earlier. So one thing that tends to happen with web filtering, and it's not that much unlike a recent vulnerability that we were all yelling about on Twitter with GoGo, where they were basically breaking the secure connection between the end user and the server and inserting their own self-signed certificate. That's happening in the majority of the filtering software that is being used in schools today. And when that self-signed certificate gets stuck in the middle, there are also some really creepy tools in there, because I haven't said creepy 10,000 times already. There are some really creepy tools in there that can figure out what the kids are doing, report back, and send the kinds of flags that get them in trouble. The majority of filtering software does this, and especially since so many schools are deploying one-on-one programs and it's moving to the cloud, this is not something that is going to get better. We recognize man-in-the-middle attacks as practitioners, and we need to be able to really spend some time looking at these things, calling them out and saying, hey, Maybe it's not cool that this is the vulnerability that everybody got mad about with Superfish and with GoGo, and we're doing this to minors. The last thing, it's story time now. In addition to man-in-the-middling kids, in addition to not encrypting things and using the appropriate privacy measures, a lot of education technologies just don't know what that OWASP top 10 thing is. They don't know what that security thing is either. But if you spend enough time poking around these sites, you will find really common vulnerabilities that are outside of the threat model that's been established by the education industry, which is advertising and marketing. So in one case, and this is relatively recent, I'm sure everyone's heard of the Lizard Kids. I think they're actually called the Lizard Squad, but I like to call them the Lizard Kids. I have a little beef to pick with them. So I would say early January, they were poking around in the web, and they realized that there was a cross-site scripting vulnerability in a piece of database software. So cross-site scripting, we've been trying to eradicate that for how long now? Yeah, not new. This shouldn't be a problem. So these Lizard Kids, they're not really highly technical at all. They know how to get behind a Metasploit, they know how to get behind burp, they know how to make that thing work, and they know how to exploit a vulnerability. What they did was they found one vulnerability in a piece of software, and then they discovered that that piece of database software was shared across 33 different universities. What they claimed to have done was to have drained all 33 universities of all of their student records. Now, I haven't gone through the entire list, and there are some people who are doing that work, but so far, in 7 or 8 cases, these kids who don't have really high technical capacity are on the web, and they're draining these universities of tons of student records. And the only way you find out is if you know to go look on Pastebin, or you see them on Twitter showing off. That's something that we can prevent, that's something we can build for, that's something that we can protect from, but there's this absolute and complete, just total ignorance of security best practices that allows things like this to happen. I mean, we know the threat model of the web is that you have to be able to survive an automated scanning tool, and these companies who are building all of these products for kids and sucking up data and sharing them left and right everywhere aren't at least protecting their end user by following at least the bare minimum practices that we have as developers. One reason that this thing tends to persist is you have the people who don't know anything about security being decision makers. So if you're talking to someone and you're saying, well, I just want to make sure that we're all together on privacy, the company will say, yeah, we take privacy really seriously. But end users don't know how to go through and how to evaluate what these products are doing and how they're actually doing that. There's no outside signal. They tend to look for a badge. They tend to look for a piece of marketing information. There's no other way to rate something unless you have the technical skill to dig through it and say yes or no. So if I haven't already made this point clear, everything fucking sucks and everything's broken. It just is. So between developers and technologists, there's not really great, you're not really paying attention to the best security practices that are out there. In terms of legislation, we don't have any bare minimum baseline to meet. I mean, there's FERPA, but FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, hasn't been touched since the 1970s. So that doesn't really help apply to all of the things that we are doing on the web right now and all of the things that we are building. It's not good enough for the world that we live in. In terms of network security, I mean, at the school district level, most schools are still running on Windows XP. It's been almost a year since Windows XP was sunset. So that's a whole bunch of unpatched O days. I don't know if anybody would actually want to burn one of those on a school. We would have to talk about that. But that's a whole bunch of unpatched, insecure software that's holding on to a whole bunch of records pretty much longer than all of our natural lives. And then in terms of end users, I cannot even begin to explain the lack of end user security awareness that is there in schools. If we're able to educate teachers, we can make this a lot better because teachers have the ability to impact, 30, 40 students that are in their classrooms at a time if we arm them with best practices and we teach them about password managers and not fucking clicking the link with the malware in it. Oh my God, please don't ransomware your whole school district. If we teach them these things, they can pass them on to kids and we can make our future a little bit better, but we don't really have any tools to do that either. So that being said, there are a few people in this world who do have the power to help do that. And that's us. That's hackers. We have the power to be able to look at a piece of technology and say whether it does what it promises to do. And we can take its creators to task for doing that or for not doing that. One thing with education is that it is a massive piece of critical social infrastructure. And as hackers, we talk about infrastructure a lot. We talk about OpenSSL, we talk about power grids, we talk about trains and planes and automobiles. But this is social infrastructure. And it's doing some really terrifying shit to kids, and we don't even know what some of the surveillance that I talked about earlier is even going to do to kids. In the case of education, words and policies aren't really mapping back to some of the technologies that find their way in the classroom. And right now, we don't have enough security researchers even paying attention to this issue to be able to push back. I can think of maybe 3 or 4, and I have been watching this particular issue for a few years now. Some of the information that is contained within all of these school systems can affect a student's entire future. And with education, if you don't like it, it's not very sexy, that's fine. But it's full of all kinds of gaping holes that endanger privacy, and it's a place where we can make a huge difference. Specifically because kids don't have any consent. They don't get to walk into a classroom and say, well, I don't think your API wrapper is really secure, so I think I'm going to take the other class. Or, oh, I don't like the way you handle Google Docs because of the way that you set up your network. There might be a little hole over here. I'm going to go take French and basket weaving. That's not how this works. When there's bad security in a school district, it's actually a lot like when there's bad security at your insurance company. You can't just pick up and leave. You have to actually have a life-changing event to get out of that system, and that's not something that's usually an option here. In a lot of cases, the self-regulation that the industry is really looking for, they all want to establish their own security principles, is just not going to fix this problem. Over the past few years, a lot of the success that we've had specifically in getting education technologies to pay attention to these issues has been when there's a parent or there's a security researcher who calls it out and calls it out very publicly. They may even use some of the skills that Melanie was describing earlier for reaching out to the media. But that's the only way that we get any change. One thing I'd like to point out too is that when we have college students who are really smart, and they poke around their school networks, and they try to do what they can to point out security holes, more often than not, they report a security hole, and they've been labeled a miscreant or a hacker, and they're in trouble. Or in the absolute worst case, I have seen situations where you've had someone who's their 5th year of college, they're an engineering student, and 3 weeks before graduation, they discover a vulnerability that would allow them to change everyone's grades, and they get suspended from school. So the 5 years of work that they did before that moment, that they tried doing the right thing and actually reporting the vulnerability, didn't even count because they found one hole and somebody got scared about it. So how can everyone help? Well, go hack at things that are education tools. If you're a parent, you can go poke around and see what's happening with the tools that your kids use in school. If you're not a parent and you want to help, just go find a list of student privacy pledge signatories. I can tell you that the fields are vast and they are ripe with O-days, I promise. There's a lot of mobile security issues, there's a lot of web application security issues, there's tons of API security issues. If you have one specific subset of security that you really enjoy, it's not hard to find an application for it in education. And if you do actually find something, I don't care how you disclose it. You can coordinate your disclosure. You can be full with your disclosure. You can do whatever you want, but if you're able to draw a parallel between some of the awful things that we have seen happen in consumer technology and fix them, and then turn around and point them out in education, That's going to be one of the most powerful tools we have to push the entire industry forward to doing the right thing for kids. It kind of depends. So if you are the student and you find a vulnerability, you might actually want to go talk to the company first and maybe not your administration. I've seen successful cases of that.
Absolutely not.
No?
EFF immediately and shut the hell up until you've done it.
Actually, that's better advice. Yep, that's better advice. He's a lawyer. He knows better.
That's why I asked the question. So you speeches specifically on disclosure policies and what's safe and what's not. And some people have like a history of being litigious and not.
Yeah. For the most part, if you find something, figure out the right way to say something. If that means you have to encrypt it, 85 different, whatever. Find it, report it, share it. It's an opportunity to get something fixed that can help a lot of people. At one point, I was really worried about actually standing up in front of a whole room of people who identify as hackers and saying, look, this is a huge, vast industry that is full of all kinds of holes. Go run after it. Because I was afraid that if I screamed too much about it, black hats would show up and we would have situations like the Lizard Kids where all of these databases are getting downloaded and getting sold on black markets and the dark web, and that would be the story. At this point, we already know these criminal groups and the black hats are kind of poking around. So what I'm really hoping that we can do as hackers is throw some white hats at this and get a few steps ahead of them and really take care of all of the kids who are stuck using these tools and have no other way to protect themselves except to trust the adults that make the decisions for them. That being said, as promised, we have made it to the end. Here is a puppy. His name is Winston, and he has a heart on his nose, and I love him, and if you see me in jail, it's because I dog-napped him. Any questions? Yes.
Not yours?
He's not mine, no. Yeah, yet. Legally. Cooper?
Yeah, so I think this might actually be needed to about this. I've heard of school web filtering out or disallowing access to any HTTPS website.
Yep.
How prevalent is that?
I actually...
How is that a thing?
Oh, so repeating the question is, is it a thing that schools are actually not whitelisting traffic to secure connections? So they're blocking HTTPS. I have seen a little bit of this, but there's really no one doing like widespread data analysis of this. It's hard to get, and you're probably going to have someone throw FERPA in your face. But yeah, that being said though, I know. That being said though, I have been working with educators for the past 2 years on raising security awareness, and I can think of a few schools even in the Bay Area that have like school district-wide implementations of HTTPS everywhere. So yay!
Sorry, I have a follow-up. Are our schools treating Tor browser bundle? Are they like punishing kids that download Tor and use it, or how is that being seen by the administration?
So the question is, how are schools treating the Tor browser bundle? Really depends. In some cases, they really don't care. The IT guy's really cool, and he's like, yeah, you found it. You're elite now. In other cases, you can look at entire school districts, like LAUSD in Los Angeles. The kids figured out a way around the iPad filtering, and that was using the Onion browser, and they got called hackers, and they all have notes on their permanent records. And they have a mark against them. Yes, Dan?
Less of a question, more of a statement. There's a lot of parallels between what you're describing in education security and typical corporate security. Yeah, there's a lot of, there's a Venn diagram, it's like 80% the same. And the other thing
Control, not security.
Right, because
Yeah.
checkbox, right?
Yeah.
The other talking point is, speaking from personal experience, the bad guys are already there. You are not disclosing that there are new vulnerabilities that people should go find. Speaking as a guy who has been crucified for scanning all the things, the bad guys are allowed to scan whatever the fuck they want, and we can't scan shit. We have to get it in writing. They're 10 years ahead of us. So by all means, submit this stuff as many conferences as you can. You're not going to hurt anything.
There is a lot of overlap between corporate problems and between this. A lot of times when I bring up the topic of education security, I hear, well, but we already have these problems. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, you do have these problems, but kids don't have consent on this particular issue. And these are their futures that we're protecting with all of this data. That's the thing we have to take care of.
So I know you sort of touched on the administrators making the decisions on which software package to purchase. It's my understanding that it's sort of ran akin to pharmaceutical, where there's a lot of backroom deals and packages, vacation packages, food for these teachers. And is there any instances where they may overlook security because they got that nice trip or?
Yeah, so the question is, like what we see with pharmaceutical companies, is there a way that maybe schools can be talked into or bribed into ignoring security vulnerabilities? There are complicated relationships, and I would say that I've seen quite a bit of the kind of back-end handshake sort of thing. With Los Angeles's iPad program, there's actually an FTC lawsuit right now, just because of some of the funny things that have been taking place there. I think, in general, school districts are becoming aware of security issues, but I don't think that security is so strong of a selling point for them that you would have to, like, ignore it or talk around it. 97% of the time, schools forget to actually negotiate 93% of the time, they forget to actually negotiate in the contract that they keep the rights to student data, that the company doesn't own it. So I feel like if they can't even remember to maybe preserve the rights to student data, they're probably not going to say, hey, by the way, do you have like a secure content header policy? What's going on here?
I don't know if it's legal or not. Maybe talk. I wasn't going to be working this shift. So I just wanted to, I was really excited to hear what you had to say because I've been dealing with this now for 3 years. My son is 14 years old, 6th grade. He gets started off in middle school, went into high school. He's at a private school where the network is wide open. The reason why it's wide open is because there's one person who's supposed to be in charge of it. He doesn't have time. So after my son was getting sent to detention for gaming when everybody games, and he just, was kind of got caught, was made the example, managed to convince the school via, I had to put monitoring software on his laptop to show them the stats. In 3 days, I had him on average at school on the web, looking at, I had over 110 different websites, 36 of them were gaming sites. So I ran my full stats, presented that to them, and in exchange, the guy that was in charge was like, I just don't have time, I really want my help. So he gave me a piece of the hassle. So last week, Steam was accounted for 23% of usage. I have it on my phone right now.
Oh my God.
23% of the usage of broadband use at school. So I just
Wow.
wanted to kind of introduce this, like, there's like two things. There's a lot going on here, but when they're in school, they really should be not browsing the net because it's really addictive, as we all know.
Some of,
What are you talking about?
yeah, I see a hand over here.
You used the word creepy a few times.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, a lot of the things that you describe as creepy go well beyond creepy in terms of being actually illegal, like we talked about, watching kids undress in front of the webcam or something like that. That's not creepy,
That's criminal. Yeah.
it's criminal. So, could I suggest, I guess this may be more of a statement, that you work on sort of refining and using more specific words to describe the harms, because I think it will make the point better.
Sure, especially when I'm working with an education audience, I'm really careful about that. Like if I tell them creepy, they're like, yeah, we hear kids say that word all the time. But yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, just recently I blew the whistle on a very high-level college administrator in
the state of California for lying about his academic credentials. I was wondering if you've ever seen any examples of malicious administrators taking false data that they said was sent from the student's email accounts or activity and using that against them, and that really hasn't happened. That's a paranoia I have for blowing the whistle against the question.
I haven't really seen anything. The question is if there's any evidence of malicious manipulation of records or anything like that. I haven't seen it. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, but I just really haven't seen it. Yes?
I actually want to address the point that the guy behind me made. He's, I guess, gone already. Spying on kids when they're undressing isn't wrong because it's illegal. It's wrong because it's a fucking adult spying on a fucking child undressing. It has nothing to do with legality issues and everything to do with the fact that that kid can't fucking consent to your behavior, and it's not okay. And that's not an issue of legality or criminality. It's an issue of shitty fucking ethics.
Can we get... I understand what you were trying to say.
And if I remember correctly, in the Pennsylvania case, nobody has actually been fired for that behavior or charged.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyone else? Yes.
Sorry. Do you think there's value in talking to administrators? It seems like a lot of these cases, administrators not understanding, right? This is a hacking tool, right? Because they don't understand what it is. And do you think there's any value in technologists going to district administrators and saying, look, I will show you, what's up with this. Like, I'm going to show you why these tools are insecure, why this is bad, what score is, why these kids might be using it.
Absolutely, because the majority of people who are in positions where they're making decisions about technology in schools do not have the technical skills or the knowledge that we might expect. They're more focused on the instructional implementation and instructional practice and learning, and kind of less about what all of this other stuff that touches the technology is. So if you ever have the opportunity to say, hey, you might want to think about this, or you might need to know this about Tor, or when you find out something about an education technology tool, ask how they treat encryption, absolutely. It's an opportunity for us to build bridges and to educate a wider audience and to really be able to, if we're able to touch one district administrator with that knowledge, that person's making decisions for like 3,000 to 5,000 kids on average. That's a pretty awesome thing to be able to do. Yes.
And sadly, if there are some looking at some very awesome judge that it goes to just knowing more than they know.
Yes.
This is more of a comment just for other people who may not know this. There's an 8th grader who was recently charged with a felony because they changed the desktop background on their teacher's computer. So, yes.
Yeah.
I just want to say Sam Morgan gave me extra credit for doing the same thing, or worse.
Yes.
It shows a discrepancy.
Do we really need to give a kid a felony because he stuck some porn on his teacher's desktop? Like, wait, what? The one that I read was a kid who changed his teacher's desktop to porn. You guys are talking, oh my God. I'm done. I read about one kid who did that with porn and he got in massive trouble, but it was in Canada.
The teacher's password was
Oh my God.
amazing, right?
So your inability to security is why a kid now has... All right, anything else? Yes. Right. Well, the behavior is not a new behavior. It's just so much easier because of how easy technology is to manipulate and to use. So anyway, I think that's all unless anyone has a sneak surprise question. And I just want to thank everyone for putting up with me saying the word creepy 500 times. And did anyone count how many times I said fuck? Thank you. Thank you. I was a little ranty.